Folks, in this lesson, we are going to talk about cameras. Cameras are very important because it is with them that we will frame the shots in which we will render our images and videos. First, let's create a camera here in this option in the upper left corner of the viewport. In Create Camera here, we will always work with the scene. Camera, actor. I never work with the top-down camera. So, it's always in this option here. Just click here with the left mouse button and we create a camera. At first, we can observe a preview of this camera here. And it has also been added here in our outliner with the name Cine Camera Actor 0, but we can rename this camera. So I can press here F2 and I will rename it to Camera 1. Look, it disappeared here, right? Let's look for it here in our scene. So I will press the G key. Here it is. So I will click on it with the left button. And I select it here. Then I can move it here in my viewport. You can observe here that its location is changed. And by pressing the spacebar, we can also rotate it. And also change its rotation here. But what is the easiest way for us to position this camera? It's by accessing it. And accessing its viewport. So for that, we go here to the Perspective tab. And here we will have all the cameras in our scene. So let's click here on Camera 1. When I create my camera, it's also good to ensure that we are in the correct level, in the persistent level, that is in the level house. So it is in my level, correct. So going back here in the outliner, so when I have this little arrow up here in the viewport, I can exit my camera and I can access it again. You may have noticed that the scene became very bright here. When we access the camera, the exposure changed. So whenever we create a camera, the first thing we should do is come here. In this option, focus settings on our camera in details. And here in manual, we should set it to disable. So this is a camera focus that allows more light into the lens, and with that, your exposure changes. So take a look here through the viewport. I'll leave it as it was and access my camera. So when I disable this option, it remains as the post-process was, with the exposure of our scene. So how do I position my camera here? With my camera accessed here, you can check here in the upper left corner, Camera 1. I will move normally and position my camera. Look, I will go up here, I will raise the details here, and we will move around and the position will change. So our first camera, we are going to position it here. We were going to do a render. So I found a nice position here, and let's talk about our camera settings. Look, I click here. On another object, the settings of our camera disappear, so I always have to click on my camera. So I will search here, camera. Look, only it is here. So the first option we have for it is this, tracking settings. These tracking settings, we will only use them when we are rendering videos. If you make a camera movement and want the camera to focus on an object, we use it. So initially, our first option that we should configure here would be this film, back. What is the film back? It is the size and proportion of our camera. So before we define here the film back, there is also another option just below, which is the lens settings, which is the configuration of our camera lens. So these are the most important settings to define the framing of our camera. So I will be opening an image here to explain something very important to you. When I work with images and video, we usually work in 3 proportions. In the first image here, in this blue part, we have the first proportion. This proportion, known as the aspect ratio, is 16:9. It is commonly and widely used for YouTube videos, especially when you view it on a TV, such as a smart TV or even a large screen TV. So this is a more horizontal proportion. Here we have the second proportion in blue, which is the one by 1 proportion. That is a square image, a square video. Normally I use this proportion only for images. It's very difficult for me to make a video in this proportion. And the third proportion here would be the same proportion as the first, but inverted. So it would be 9 by 16. And this proportion is widely used for Instagram and TikTok. So today it is one of the ones I use the most. So why is this ratio important? Because here we are going to define the ratio of our canvas. So here we have the width and the height. Do you remember that the ratio is 9:9? What is this first ratio? So let's start with it. When you create image in Full HD, this 16:9 ratio, usually, when you multiply by 120, it becomes 1920 by 1080, which is the ratio of an image in Full HD. So if this ratio is 16:9, that is 1920 by 1080, I will adopt it here, 1920 by 1080. But it caused a significant distortion in our camera. So I will use this ratio divided by 100. So I will set it to approximately 19.2. By 10.8, it would basically be 1920 by 1080, which is the same ratio as 16:9. Okay? Right below here, we have the camera lens. So the camera lens. Here we have an image that shows a 14mm lens, a 24mm lens, a 35mm lens, and so on, increasing. And what happens? When we increase our lens, we have a greater focus on the object. And it also brings the object closer, both the foreground and background objects. So for larger lenses, we use them for those images when we want to focus on an object. So if I want to take a picture focusing only on a chair, only on a table, only on a fire, only on a person, we increase the camera lens. So as this image at first is a general image of our scene, I usually work with values here from 20 to 30. Very low values can distort our camera. So let's see this in practice. Here we have some lenses already configured. Look how cool. I will set it to the 85mm lens. It gave a very strong zoom. So I will set it here to the 30mm lens. And it continued with a smaller zoom. But I will try here, a 10mm lens. So it might be that our image distorts a bit. So what do I usually do? As I typically adopt here. On average, 25. From 20 to 30, I will leave an average here. So I will type 25 in the upper field. And it will already... It didn't do it automatically. So I will set 25 in the upper field and 25 in the lower field. But look how annoying, right? We can't just frame our camera, it's too close. Do you remember the ratio we're using, 19.2 by 1080? So what am I going to do? Here in Unreal, I will multiply this ratio by 2, so we can keep the same image ratio and make it more distant. But don't worry, you don't need to grab a calculator and do this. Using the asterisk key, Unreal already performs this multiplication. So I will click here, and in the horizontal part, write *2. And it will already multiply by 2. And here at the bottom part would be our camera height here, *2. So now we have a camera here, a ratio that I use the most. So when I make videos for YouTube, or that will be shown on TV, I always use this ratio. And these values can vary from the lens, from 20 to 30. Now if I set it to 10 here, look at that. How much our camera got distorted, so it becomes a very ugly image. So let's go back to 25, our lens. So these two options are the most important options for us to be here, framing the dimension of our camera. So if I step back, look at that. There's a wall here getting in my way. So there's a very important option on the camera here. We can go down a bit here. In advances, and there's this near clipping plane. And what does this do? It will cut our geometries that are in front of the camera. Let me click on my camera again, and I'll increase this value. I can also type it in. I'll set the value to 100 here. 200. Look at that. What does it do? It cut my geometry. So if I set it to 300 here, I can move my camera further back. I'll set a higher value, 350. 450. But now it cut off my floor, right? So what am I going to do? I'm going to position my camera a bit higher and reduce this value a little. Alright, I think this is a pretty good spot. Interesting. So now I'm just going to reduce my lens a little. I definitely want to demonstrate more of this particular part of our house. I'll set it to 22 by 22 right here. But look, it showed my floor slightly cut off. So I'll go to my plane clipping and reduce it a little. I'm going to move my camera a bit forward using the movement keys and frame my camera here. Alright, it might be slightly tilted to the side, a bit crooked. So whenever I position my camera, I go up here to the Transform tab and reset my rotation to 0. And here I'll set it to 90 because my camera is rotated 90 degrees in my project. If I set it to 0, it will turn to the right. To the left, actually. So I'll set it to 90 here. This way, I'm sure my camera isn't crooked. So all rotations reset to 0. And just this one at 90 degrees. I'll raise it a little more here because it was showing the edge cutoff. Great. So here we position our camera. And if I don't want to adjust it anymore, I want to keep it locked. It's very simple. You will right-click here and go to Transform and activate this option here to lock its movement. So, with this option activated, even if I try to move here, it won't budge. So we have our first camera created and positioned. So, let's just click on it again to see some more of its functions. So, what did I mention in previous lessons? All cameras, look how interesting. It has an integrated price process. So sometimes there's a part of our scene that's darker or lighter, and we want to use a different exposure. So we always control the exposure through the camera. So in the post process, I set a general exposure to visualize the project. And here I refine this exposure. So I'm going to close my filter in my outliner here. And I'm going to search here in the post process. I'll click on it and then click here in the search bar to see the exposure we are using. Let me scroll up here. There, in our post process, we are using manual exposure at 10.3, correct? So I'm going to my camera. And I'm going to activate here in my exposure manual and 10.3. So later we can change these values after we add our vegetation and work on the materials. But it's always interesting to leave it here, movable in the camera. For each camera, we might have a different exposure value. Let me close the search bar here. So here we have all the post-process functions, we have the blur, we have that issue of the right balance to make our scene more yellowish. So if I write right here, I can make my scene yellowish just for this camera. And look how interesting, I'll leave it quite yellow. If I come up here and exit my camera, look, just my scene is normal. It has the post-process configuration. But my camera has its own configuration. So it is completely independent. So I'll go back to the perspective and access my camera once more. And I'll set the standard to 6500 here. We also have another option here. For example, I'll write saturation. We have the saturation option. All the options we have in the post-pros, we also have here in the camera. So do you remember that there, in the lumen settings, in the post-pros, I set the values very low, so we don't make our scene too heavy. Here in the camera, I usually set these values higher, so when we render, we get a higher quality image. So, you can type lumen here in the camera's search bar. And we access all the lumen settings, the same as in the PO's process. So the options I always use are the light quality, I set it to 4. The scene. Detail to capture those smaller objects like grass, I set it to 4. The final getter, in fact, I set it to 4. Here in the reflections, the quality, I set it to 4. And that's it. So we already have a stronger and more robust setup here to render our images. But when I exit my camera, I will be working with the post-process configuration, which will all be set to 1. So I will have more fluidity in my project. Now let me access my camera again. So as we created this first camera, it works as a post-process. Remember that rotation tip I gave? So what can I do? I can come here to my camera, click on it, and press Ctrl C. And I will go to my project in the folder that, or any folder on your computer. And you can save this camera so that when you start a new project, you don't have to redo all of this again, it's all done. CTRL C, CTRL V. So I will create a notepad here. I will put camera. Its aspect ratio would be approximately 16:9. Just to simply remind myself that it's just a horizontal camera. Then I will open my notepad and press Ctrl V. Then I can save and close. So I have this camera saved. I can use it in other projects. I don't need to configure it again. Let's go back to our project. Now, we are going to make a camera with a square aspect ratio. In this ratio, 1:1. Normally in this ratio, I don't make videos, only images. So, depending on the position of your project, sometimes it's a smaller environment or you want to show more of the sky, this framing works very well. So since I already have this camera here in our project, let me close this. Our search bar. So I don't have to do all those exposure. And lumen settings, what am I going to do here? I will click on my camera, I will press Ctrl C and Ctrl V. Great. It has already renamed it to camera 2. So, look, I'm accessing camera 1. So let's click here on perspective and access our camera 2. Now, we are going to change its ratio to a 1:1 image. So we can come here to film back in. You can use values for a 1:1 ratio. So if I set it to 1:1, it will be very large. So let's try 10:10. Look, it's quite close. So let's work with 30:30 here. Look how interesting, but it's showing this part at the bottom cut off. Reduce to 25:25. Let me reduce the clip a bit here to see if we can remove this part that's cutting off the floor. Okay. So let's move this camera a little forward. But since it's locked, because we copied this one, camera 1, we need to right-click here on the utility, transform, and deactivate this option. Now I can move my camera a little forward. I'll reduce my clip a bit so it doesn't cut off the floor here. Okay. And always checking here to make sure it's not crooked. For example, if it's at 5 here, it will be crooked. So I reset it to 0. If it's at 5 here, it will be crooked. So it's reset to 0, it's correct. So my square camera is correct. Then I will right-click here on Node 2 Liner on the camera and lock it. So now I can't move it. I will press the F11 key to view this camera in full screen. And now I will switch to my camera 1. So, what is the difference with it? Our camera 1 is in this proportion. And camera 2 is in this proportion. And now, analyzing our image here, we have the third camera, which is the camera I use for Instagram and TikTok. And it's the same proportion as this one. The first, just inverted. So it's 9:16. But before creating it, let me press F11 again. Let's type camera here. Let's take our camera 2 and press Ctrl+C on it. And let's go to our folder and save the configuration of this camera here. So camera 1 by 1, which is its ratio. I'll open my notepad here, press Ctrl+V, save and close. So we already have a camera configured here in the 1:1 ratio and in the 16:9 ratio. So now let's duplicate this camera. I'll press Ctrl+C and Ctrl+V here, and let's create our third camera. So we can come here to the perspective and access camera 3. So with camera 3 selected, we can come here to fill back and change the ratio. So you remember that the ratio is 9:16. It is here in the ratio as if it were a standing cell phone, the same ratio as the cell phone screen. So let me press F11 here to exit this immersive mode, and I'll click on my camera 3. So if it is the reverse of the cell phone, and it is the reverse of the first one, then, if my first one was 38.4 by 21.6, I can come here and type the inverse. So up here it will be 21.6 and here 38.4. So look, I will just click on my camera 1, 38.4, 21.6, and camera 3, which is its inverse, 21.6, 38.4. Let me show you. But then there was that problem of it being cut off at the bottom. So normally when we set up this camera here, we will always change the framing. It's very difficult not to show this cut when we use the clip. So I will disable the clip here, and I will move my camera. And how do I do that? First, we must unlock it. So we go here, in Transform, we unlock it. And let's move here. The speed, if it's too fast, you can always control it with the mouse scroll. Remember? Mouse scroll forward, the camera goes fast. Mouse scroll backward, the camera goes slower. Here it will be a bit difficult to frame our camera. So later there are other techniques for us to hide this wall, or some vegetation that will be in front here. I will explain to you. But initially, what can we do here? Let's go here to the clip. In our camera 3 and in the clip option, reduce it a bit. Now let's move our camera a little forward and upward. Right. So let's make sure the rotation is all reset. I stay on my camera, 3:00:90. Okay. So here we have this camera framed. Then we can be locking it as well. I will click here on Transform and lock in movement. I did not change the lens value here in lens settings for any camera. I left all at 22. But in some cases, we might be moving back a bit here. I will leave it here at 15 and 15. Look, it caught the part that was cut off here. I will leave it at 18, 18, no? 19, 19, 20, 20. So this one stayed with a lens of 22, this one with a lens of 22. In camera 3, we left the lens at 20 to frame better. So let's do the same process and save this camera here. Then I will create a new notepad anywhere on my computer. Camera 9:16 is the inverse of this one. I will come here to my camera 3, press C, and come here to my notepad and do a Ctrl-V. I will save and close. Initially, we will leave the camera stationary because in the next class, we will work on materials and make our scene more beautiful than vegetation. And when it comes time to render our images and make our animations, we will return here to the cameras because there are some very interesting tools in them for us to learn. So, after positioning our 3 cameras, remember that if you can't find them here in the utilizer, just type up here, camera. So, we have all our cameras created. Then we can exit the camera view mode. I will exit the view mode here. And if I press the G key, we can see the 3 cameras. Look how cool. So here is camera 3, here is camera 2, and here is camera 1. So they are here in the mode gamer, in the mode accessed with the G key. And whenever we click on them, their preview already appears here. To help us identify which camera it is, I will press the G key here, so they don't leave our render, okay? So if I have a camera here that will render this part, these cameras will not leave our render. They don't interfere. So that's it.